So the final talk for our session today, we're moving location to the Waiapu catchment on the east coast of the North Island, and our speaker, Dr. Peter Edwards. Peter's a political scientist who works for Scion. Thank you, Peter.
Great, thank you, Bruce. So this talk's actually a little bit different than what everybody's been listening to, and I want to thank Johanna for sort of, I guess, introducing this. So I'm going to talk about the project that myself and quite a number of people have been involved in called Weaving the Korowai of Papanuku. And what it is it's been looking at the Waiapu catchment, as Bruce said, but not in sort of an ecological sense, I suppose, how we can restore it ecologically, but how we can weave together the cultural, the social, the economic, along with the ecological restoration. So this talk's going to be more about the social and the cultural than anything else. Right, so basically, kind of I guess for Ngāti Porou, the iwi that live up in the Waiapu, they're, I guess, seem to have an incredibly close relationship with place, and that place extends to both the land and the water, and kind of the people amongst themselves. So there's kind of a I guess proverb that has been kind of described as kind of the holy trinity of Christianity, but for the Ngāti Porou, Hikurangi the mountain, Waiapu the river, and Ngāti Porou the people. So they're very sort of connected with the land and the water, and it's an incredibly, I guess, important sort of part of their life. So for those that may not be sort of completely familiar, this is the Waiapu catchment. So it's up on the kind of the very sort of between Gisborne and East Cape, up on the North Island, quite remote, sort of quite a ways up there. So it's incredibly remote. There's actually very few people that live up there. There's about 2,000 people at the last census. And it's essentially got sort of, a huge number, I'll go back. Oh. Hang on. A huge number of sort of social, economic, and ecological problems. So if I go to this, so I guess essentially there's always been sort of erosion and degradation of the Waiapu and the Mata and the other rivers in the area, but kind of taking from Johanna, a tipping point in the late 80s was Cyclone Bola that came through and basically devastated, I mean, not just this area, but this area was particularly badly hit. Huge amounts of erosion, trees and roads and other sort of structures destroyed, as you can see. But of course, this is sort of, I guess, kind of the tipping point of long-standing deforestation. And I'm not going to get into sort of the ecological or the biological. I mean, essentially the kind of the very simplest level, the cure is to plant more trees and arrest this erosion. But it's actually not that simple when you start to include the cultural, social, physical in there as well. So this is sort of some examples of what it looks like now. This is a place called Barton's Gully, one of the largest, not the largest, but one of the largest eroding areas. Basically, entire sides of mountains are coming down, and while you might think looks like it's a riverbed, it's actually isn't the riverbed. It's a huge, basically, gravel flow coming down from one of these eroding sites. You sort of move over to actually looking at the river itself. You can see the river is quite sort of aggraded. There's a huge amount of sediment, and as it sort of has moved down through its path, it kind of has carved out banks and eroded farther down in the catchment as well. So it's basically sort of free flowing, but there's actually not that much water going through it. It's not a very good habitat right now for particularly the kai that the Ngāti Porou used to harvest from it. It can't be used for transport. They used to use it for recreation and other cultural activities, but it's sort of so badly degraded now that it's really not much use for anything. And kind of with that sort of background, there's been a huge amount of work looking at the ecological and the sort of the biophysical aspects of it, and Bruce has done a huge amount of work, as well as people like Mike Martin at Landcare over the past. But about 5 to 10 years ago, a number of colleagues at Scion started looking at the social and kind of economic, cultural aspects of it. So there are sort of basically two kind of major projects. The first one looked at the kind of the whole catchment and sort of the problems and the challenges that are faced there, and then a more specific one, a slightly later one, was looking at the different sort of let's call it assets or capitals that the people and the catchment actually have, and how those could be basically harnessed for change. So the sort of the previous work and the current work, we've been using this framework called the Sustainable Livelihoods framework. So we start to sort of, we see, kind of take, well, keep pressing the wrong one. There's sort of a vulnerability context, so there's potential for some sort of shock or pressure or kind of something happening. And the things that kind of influence that are what are called the livelihood assets. So the livelihood assets are sort of human capital, so basically the numbers of people that are there, kind of their skills, their abilities, social capital, how those relationships are formed and what relationships are in the catchment, the physical capital, which is things like infrastructure, so roads, bridges, telecommunications, internet, and electricity, those types of things. Financial capital, quite self-explanatory, and then natural capital. So natural capital is basically the environmental, the natural resources that are there. With this project, we've actually added a sixth capital, so cultural capital. So how much, kind of the cultural assets that are there. And what we're doing is sort of using these assets and kind of looking at kind of the structures and the processes that are in existence, and how these assets can be kind of married up with these sort of structures and processes to generate kind of strategies, and then eventually, better outcomes for people's livelihoods. So, more income, increased well-being, reduced vulnerability, and those sorts of things for that catchment. So, looking at this. If I look sort of at this map here, we've mapped out the Waiapu catchment, and we've taken the data from the New Zealand Index of Deprivation. So most of this catchment is either sort of deprivation index 9 or 10. There's a little bit sort of up here at 7, and kind of up at the top here where essentially let's call them the rich Pakeha landowners, it's at about 5. So this catchment is one of the most socially and economically deprived areas in New Zealand. And this came out in some of the data that we collected, where we've mapped these 6 capitals. So you can see that, basically the financial capital is incredibly low. There's higher levels of sort of cultural, social capital, and same with sort of kind of the human capital. The natural capital was actually quite low because it's basically because of the erosion and the kind of the sedimentation that has, I guess, compromised that. Physical capital was also incredibly low. There's basically one road in from the south and one road out in the north that often gets washed away. There's fairly poor telephone and internet connectivity up there. So it's basically, it's an incredibly impoverished area. The average household income is about $17,000 a year. So that's benefits are below level. So if I go on. So this project has been sort of comes out of the this memorandum of understanding that as part of this treaty settlement, the Ngati Porou Gisborne District Council and the Crown, as represented by MPI, signed. And the whole idea of that was to take a long-term, sort of 100-year or long-term vision of actually working together to restore the catchment, restore the water, restore the land, and then bring the people back to kind of a healthy state. There's also, in addition to this, since sort of within the last year, Gisborne District Council and the Runanga have signed a joint management agreement, so they can actually sort of co-decide on resource consents in the Waiapu. However, because of that sort of huge lack of different capitals and assets there really hasn't been an opportunity for Ngati Porou to actually get involved or get things off the ground. The river's sort of too degraded, the erosion is continuing, there's a lack of finance, a lack of resources. And I guess this sort of started getting me thinking, and it's, I guess, not to sort of colonize Ngati Porou with my thoughts, but sort of my, I guess, crazy or ambitious idea would be, wouldn't it be kind of quite interesting or potentially even great if Maori or Ngati Porou or Maori in total could become somewhat self-governing? So, potentially, create their own district or regional council so that they can make the decisions that will benefit them rather than somebody else coming in and deciding for them. So this project, and I'll quickly go through it, has we've got 4 streams. So developing with Ngati Porou, we're developing a monitoring and evaluation framework. So as they move sort of through to working through this memorandum of understanding and actually restoring the catchment, how can they monitor and evaluate what success looks like? Then we've got a number of, looking at a number of basically adaptive governance principles to try and get decision makers there thinking outside the box. How can they take what they have, the limited resources that they have, and actually restore that catchment area. We also are looking at how we can actually build sort of the networks and the links between, not just within the catchment, but between Ngati Porou and sort of various agencies, and also looking at how we can sort of scale that up and into sort of a wider perspective. So I'll just focus briefly on the second one, the adaptive governance aspect. So we've done a huge sort of social network, two social network analyses. So the first one was looking at how all the different sort of agencies or non-Maori entities were connected, and they're actually a lot of them are quite well connected, but they're not well connected to the Maori themselves up there. So that's the first sort of, I guess, discord. And the second one, we looked at a number of hapu, and each of these black dots are separate hapu. They are actually quite, I guess, discrete as well. They don't connect very well. So one of the key things is looking at how we can build that sort of bridging and linking social capital. So how can those relationships that they have be expanded and made stronger between themselves and then also between the agencies? And one of the, I guess, sort of the kind of the adaptive governance aspects of it, trying to bring people together for sort of these 8, I guess, principles. So making sure that, collaboration is meaningful across all the different stakeholders and all the different community members. How they can actually coordinate their activities, like I said, building the social capital, empowering the community, so actually getting the Ngāti Porou themselves to actually take the initiative and be able to take the initiatives that they want to take for themselves, and developing a number of sort of these other capacities. And I guess the way sort of where we're at right now, it's taken quite a bit of effort to actually get these parties to talk to each other, but we're starting on in the next month a whole series of basically serious games. So a series of role-playing games where the different parties to the MOU and that are involved in the catchment can actually sort of take on the persona of the others, understand the challenges and the opportunities that they have without any sort of real-world consequences, and see if we can, I guess, get kind of incremental change that way. So that's kind of where it's at, and I'll just acknowledge all of my sort of co-authors and colleagues from both Scion and a number of Ngāti Porou that have co-created this with us. So, thanks.
So, are there any questions? Any questions? Yes, one over here.
I'll ask one. It's always been a very, very difficult catchment to deal with. And post-cyclone whole solution to every east coast was pine trees. And the difficulty, I guess, you give up there is, of course, that's not actually a perfect solution, but the financial incentives from MPI are biased towards pine as opposed to regeneration and Manuka tea tree. Mm-hmm. And that's a financial penalty as well to make some of those things working. How do you think that you could address that issue by socialising people and getting that feedback through?
I guess some of that feedback has actually gotten through to MPI, so they do actually fund Manuka now, and that's a change that's just happened this year, sort of, yes. And I guess the other big change that they've done on their own is that it's no longer sort of, let's call it a reimbursement scheme. It is actually a grant now, so you don't have to front the money up front. But I guess that's one of the huge sort of tensions where, I guess, all the parties do agree that planting is kind of the key to restoring it, but you've got MPI with that radiata mindset. You've got the council that says, poplars and willows, and Ngāti Porou that want Manuka and other natives. I think, yeah. Well, they are slowly changing, but I guess kind of the overwhelming still legacy is still poplars and willows. So it is changing, and I guess we're I guess kind of that experiment with the games is actually going to hopefully kind of spur them to think a little bit more outside the box.
Thank you, Peter. So that is the end of the first session of ecosystem restoration. If you want to continue with this theme, you come back here after lunch. So have a good lunch, and could you join with me in thanking all of those excellent speakers from this morning. Thank you.